welcome to Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow. My name is Mariana Fortier, and I am your host. Afghanistan is a complex and evolving situation for the United States. In order to help us understand the past and current situation, I am joined by three fantastic guests. My first is a retired Colonel Manuel Superville, who served as an Army JAG officer in Afghanistan. I have Bob Levy, who is a prize-winning journalist, who is with the Washington Post and has been following the Washington scene and many administrations. How many, we'll ask Bob later. And I'm also joined by Sonia Bruton. She's the Chief Executive Officer and President of CCI Health and Wellness Centers, which is going to be talking to us about the refugee programs that are going to be for the health of the refugees that are coming to Maryland. So welcome all of you. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. And Manny, I would like to start with you, if you don't mind, to give us a little bit of background about Afghanistan, because, you know, I hear them talking about the Taliban and the Afghanis, but they're all Afghanis. There isn't, you know, a difference except for maybe their geographical or philosophical. So can you explain that to us so we know better?
I'll provide a very short, brief introduction here, but keeping in mind that this is, of the 68 countries that I have served in, this is the most complex by far. And I was there as the senior judge advocate for all coalition forces, or lawyer, or a military lawyer for US and coalition forces in 2005 and 2006. Basically, the country of Afghanistan, as we know it today, was the map was drawn by the Brits many years ago. There are approximately 23 different tribal groups in or ethnic groups. Even within tribal groups, like everybody hears about the Pashto, within the Pashtus, there are multiple different tribal groups. So it's a very complex environment. And just starting off with, I guess, US involvement, the original mission, once the US government determined that Osama bin Laden was the one behind the 9/11 attacks, and we knew that he was physically in Afghanistan being hosted and protected by the Taliban, who controlled the majority of the country, but not all of it. There was the Northern Alliance, the people with Tajik and Uzbek background. We asked them to turn him over. They did not, the Taliban did not. And so we went in with a mission which was twofold. Number one, to either capture or kill Osama bin Laden. And number two, to prevent Afghanistan from ever again being a platform or a base for terrorist activities that could reach the United States. Even though the Taliban themselves, who came originally from the southern part, from Kandahar, were not international terrorists in the sense that they had never targeted the United States. But that was the original mission. We went in, we dislodged the Taliban from power. And then we had this very complex situation where we invited and encouraged other allies to come in to do a nation, essentially what is a nation building kind of mission. We had provincial reconstruction teams all over the country, and the idea was to stand up an Afghanistan under our image, basically a Western image, in terms of its government structure and politics and so on and so forth. And at the same time, we had the war, the global war on terrorism, as it was called. So there's very complex environment where certain forces are fighting terrorists, which included not just it wasn't really focused on the Taliban, quite frankly. It was focused on Al-Qaeda, and it was focused on Hekmatyar and some other international reach type terrorists. And then the NATO mission was primarily focused on the nation building and creating a permissive environment to do that, while pushing and creating space between the reconstruction teams and the Taliban. So
it sounds super straightforward, but I know it was nowhere near that straightforward.
No, and by 2006, I'll just close with this. By 2006, we essentially merged the two missions into one, but where basically there was just one unified command, as opposed to having a US-led coalition force, and on the other side, a NATO primarily reconstruction kind of force. By 2006, that was all merged. And so here we are today.
And, you know, how possible? I mean, we are leaving Afghanistan, right? So just without the politics involved, how possible is all the work that has been done up till now going to survive the changes that Afghanistan is rapidly experiencing and will continue to experience once the United States is no longer there?
I will just say this: our 20 years of being there were, and the vast majority of the population there is very young. They're under 25, and so as a result, you have this very young population that has known nothing but the relative freedoms of being under, let's say, U.S. and European and allied protection, if you will. And I keep stressing the word relative because it's not anywhere close to what you might think. But even so, the Taliban of the mid 90s, when they took over, and by the time 2001, when we took them out, have very different goals. There's a lot of financial objectives now with regards to rare earth minerals and lithium. There's huge mining opportunities in Afghanistan that didn't used to be there. I mean, they were there, it's just that they weren't economically feasible. The drug trade, they provide well over 80% of all the heroin to Western Europe. So there's a lot of economic factors, and China, and I'm sure that Mr. Levy will address some of these issues in terms of the very complex geopolitical space that is Afghanistan, between India, China, interests from Pakistan, of course, Iran, of course, has its interests, and the Russians and the United States. So I'll stop there and let others address.
Colonel, thank you for the cue, because you just said the magic word a couple of minutes ago, and the magic word was complex. And I have to say that my beloved media do not handle complex stories very well, and neither do our audiences. So we don't like it. We like to see simplicity. We like to know who's wearing the blue uniform, who's wearing the red uniform, and who's winning and who's losing and who's to blame. And immediately after the disaster of the terrorist attack on our Marines and the civilians, that was pretty much what the media structure and coverage looked like. And I regret that. I have always wondered why we can't do better with complex foreign stories. But one factor here is not just the impatience of our readers and viewers, it is the fact that things go stale after 20 years. Afghanistan was not a hot news story. It was not, as the kids like to say, a thing. It was a thing at first, and it was less of a thing lately. And when all of a sudden Afghanistan exploded onto the front pages of the newspapers, I think a lot of people were genuinely out of touch with the reality that produced this event of the last month.
Yeah, I mean, so in our conversations earlier, Colonel, you were explaining to me that, you know, the military trains for removing citizens and embassies in case, you know, something happens and you need to get people out quick. And that you generally, why don't you tell us instead of me telling what you told me?
Well, I totally agree with everything that Mr. Levy said. I mean, he's absolutely right. And that has been a frustration for those of us that have served in Afghanistan, particularly during the vast majority of time when it was not a thing, and attention was elsewhere. And so that has led to a lot of these issues. But with regards to what we call in the military a NEO exercise, NEO, which is a non-permissive evacuation operation. That typically happens when there's an embassy, there's a problem, a revolution, God knows what, and we have to pull people out quickly. In this particular case, we are somewhere in the neighborhood of pretty close to maybe 120,000 people that we have evacuated on very short notice. And we have had these tragic, not just the casualties of our Marines, the 15 Marines, but also the civilians. And when you put that in the context of successfully getting 120,000 people out, and under those circumstances, you know, I salute the Marines and I salute everybody else. And I would just say that this has not been the catastrophic, chaotic. It has been chaotic, but that's just it. We're trained to deal with chaos. And so I think it's been essentially a success.
I think you're right. The United States Air Force has just performed one of the most remarkable evacuations in the shortest amount of time in history. not just in Afghanistan, not just in the Middle East, but in history. And honestly, I think the coverage during this whole evacuation has not paid attention to that, not as well as it should have. And I'd welcome your comments about that.
No, I no need in driving this point home too far, but I am just so proud of the young kids, the Marines and the Army and the Air Force that are there doing this job. And when you think about it, 15 horrible casualties of Americans and a couple of hundred or so of Afghans, but to get 120,000 people out at a time when it wasn't even the Taliban that were targeting us, it was a whole nother group, the ISIS group, that was causing this mayhem. I mean, it's just remarkable how successful, really, I think this operation has been.
Well, and Bob, I want to ask you, why is it that we can't, well, why is it that the media and even the audience believe that going to war should have zero casualties and not understand that when we enter into these environments that the probability of casualties is high, and most military groups are calculating what is an acceptable or not acceptable.
Mariana, I would answer this way, that with all due respect to the medium that we're appearing on right now, the answer to your question is television, and particularly prime time cop shows and war shows and soap operas and dramas. Every problem that we see between 8 p.m. and 11 p.m. every weeknight in our homes is wrapped up very neatly in 59 minutes so that the credits can run, so they can do the promo for the next show. And we as a country don't have any appetite for the truth of what you just said. There are going to be chaotic situations in war. There are going to be difficult stories for the media to cover. There are going to be stories that are impossible to cover. We can't just call up the PR office of the Taliban and get a balancing quote every time we want one. It doesn't happen that way. So I really do blame a kind of intellectual laziness among TV viewers in our country for the phenomenon that you identify.
It's disappointing because I can't imagine the men and women in our military feel fantastic when they're getting drummed on by the media as to that maybe they're doing something wrong or not doing it right, when, as the colonel said, they have actually executed an extraordinary evacuation of more people than they actually were even trained for. So I mean, that's fantastic.
Well, and it's not just that. If you look at the instant polls that have been taken in the 2 weeks since Afghanistan exploded, and you see that the president of the United States is down 3 points in the polls, and underlying that is the idea that he should somehow miraculously have made all the chaos disappear by snapping his fingers. That is the media culture that we are in. That is the political culture that we are in, and the two go hand in hand.
What are the dangers of allowing, I'm a history buff, so I always, in particular ancient history and the Roman emperor and the mob and how to control the mob, and in some respects, I think of the audience and the population that's watching all this media and the outrage and the demands that they are asking for, in that time capsule may seem to them realistic, but in fact is dangerous because it's not realistic and it's not healthy for the country. How do we deal with that? How do we better that from happening? Bob.
Well, I don't think it's going to be simple. I think it's going to mean that our young people particularly embrace complexity, as Colonel Superville said. I don't think that's going to be simple because of the almost religious fervor with which young people use social media and try to boil things down to very digestible amounts and sizes. Twitter, if Twitter honestly thinks that we can analyze a situation as complex as Afghanistan in 140 characters, I just fear for everybody. Oh, sorry, it's now 280 characters, whoopee. This is so difficult, and it's so difficult not just for the media, but for the political and military leadership, that I don't think it's going to be simple to solve.
Well, and I predict that the next issue that's going to permeate the media and the news and rest is the refugees that are going to be here in the United States. And Sonia is here to talk to us about the program that they're spearheading for offering health services for the refugees that will be coming to the state of Maryland. And so I wanted to give her a chance to tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So in keeping with what we've heard so far, they're not a soundbite. Now they're real people living in our real communities. And so they've already started to arrive here in our area in this part of Maryland. And the way that the State Refugee Health Program works is there are two health agencies, CCI for the portion of the state that we cover. Any refugee that's resettled into this area comes to us for their first 2 medical visits with the expectation and the hope that they will remain patients of ours ongoing and that they will have established a medical home. And so what we're finding is that after the heroic deeds of our military and after people are hearing and seeing their little snippets in the media sound bites, that when they're coming to us, they're traumatized, they are afraid, they are very fearful, not only for themselves here and their safety, but also their family and their friends. They are coming in the midst where we're still in a pandemic. And so it's delayed getting their Social Security numbers, which is what's necessary to get their Medicaid benefits. They are not coming with their full medical records, of course. And so they're now having to navigate our health system and our county system to establish work, housing. And so at CCI, we, in those first 2 visits, we first screen them for any conditions that we'll have already eradicated by the ages of the folks that we're seeing. So we'll test them for MMR, polio, TB, and make sure that they're not bringing those viruses into our communities and that they are rid of them if they have them. We make sure that they can navigate the medical system to get their prescriptions. We make sure that they have follow-up care for dental exams, that they receive a full mental health evaluation to address some of the trauma and the fear and to help them cope and to transition into our communities. So
I imagine that some of your challenges, though, are going to be language. Has the program taken into consideration having translators?
Absolutely. This program has been going on for many, many decades. And so Afghani refugees and asylees have been coming for a long time. And so they're not new to this area. It's not a new population for us to serve. What's different now are just the numbers. We're getting a huge influx. So in the first week of August, we saw as many Afghan asylees and refugees or special immigrant visa holders as we had done the entire month of July. We're getting 12 to 15 referred in a 3-day period. The ones that we're seeing at CCI are coming to us from Fort Lee. They get assigned to the various resettlement agencies in our network that really work with them day to day to help them get food, help them to understand and get rides where they need to go. But yes, it does come with full translation services. It's harder to get them in person, again, because of COVID, but we do have them available virtually. At CCI, we're continuing to see refugees from Central Africa, from Central and South America. So the refugee health program in general is still going, still serving the globe. We're just having a larger percentage now coming from Afghanistan.
First of all, in Afghanistan, I know I'm painting with an overly broad brush, but there's a big difference between Kabul and everywhere else. Maybe to some extent you have Kandahar and Mazar Sharif and Herat, but basically the people who are coming in from Kabul have a very different background and level of education and so on and so forth than the folks out in the countryside. And the vast majority of those who will be coming now are in fact from Kabul, because that's where they were helping and working with Americans and foreigners in the war against the Taliban and Al Qaeda and Hek Makhtiar and the others. So that's one thing. Second point is that I actually am a Cuban refugee, and there is a big difference between that first wave of Afghans that came here during the Soviet time, when they were much better educated and wealthier at the end of the day, much like the Cuban wave, the first wave of Cubans that came in the early 60s compared to many subsequent waves. So there are large Afghan communities in the United States. The DC area is one, Southern California, Michigan, et cetera. But it's a very different group of folks than those who are coming now. And those are the kinds of things that the doctor and the folks who are going to have to address will have to take into consideration, that it's not just a homogeneous Afghan population that they're going to be blending into.
And how has the response been from the refugees when going through the program? I mean, is the learning curve small, big? Are they able to get the services they need?
It's coming kind of piecemeal. Part of the problem, again, is that so many things are virtual. Our care at CCI is not. We have maintained in-person care throughout the entire pandemic, and our commitment is to do so. But many of the other services are not. And so they've been given stress reduction courses virtually, though. And so what we're finding is that that's not an effective mode of transmission of knowledge. That knowledge transfer is inadequate. So,
so what are you guys doing to fix that?
Part of it is, what we're seeing and what we're adjusting to is typically those first 2 visits that I described to you, those are 1-hour-long visits. After that, for refugees and asylees who come, the expectation is they blend into your regular patient population. They go down to those 20-minute visits like everyone else. And what we're seeing is that's not responsive, respectful, or adequate. And so we're keeping the visits longer and providing many more of the other services within those exchanges.
To Bob and to the Colonel, what would you tell the audience that is watching this and getting so much information to consider and to filter what they're seeing in the news and such? What would be your advice to them to keep an eye out or an ear out for, us to better understand what's going on?
Well, let me respond this way to that, Mariana. I, alas, am old enough to remember the end of the Vietnam War very, very vividly, 46 years ago. And when refugees came in large numbers to the United States, the political tapestry at that time was, how is America going to feel about absorbing a lot of refugees who don't understand our culture and don't speak our language after the first war that the United States has ever lost? Well, now look at this. We got a second war that the United States has lost. And I think that if you look at the charitable history of the United States and the charitable history of Maryland, that, as Dr. Bruton says, we're in pretty good shape here in this country and in Maryland. But I just worry about people opening their hearts and opening their communities and their homes and their wallets to a very large number of people who are going to arrive all at once. The big difference 46 years ago was that the Vietnamese refugees did not arrive all at once. So America had a little bit of a runway to deal with this. I'd be interested in your thoughts about that, Dr. Bruton, from where you sit.
Absolutely. We're already seeing, there was a call today, even from the White House, to other care providers in Maryland and Philadelphia, quite frankly, trying to get more people who can serve. We have had an influx of people call and ask, what can I give? What do they need? And what we know is that initially, they need all the things that you need when you're first establishing yourself. They need laundry detergent in the form of pods. They need gift cards to grocery stores. But these needs aren't going away with one donation. And the program is designed that folks are a little more self-sufficient after 1 year and able to make their own way from there. And I think that what we're already seeing is that's just not a realistic path.
So Manny, Colonel, I've got about 2 minutes. In a minute, can you tell me what you predict is going to happen with Afghanistan here on out?
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty tall order to be precise. I cannot be precise, but I do I would just say that we should expect the unexpected. I think that the Taliban, like I said, the Taliban of 2021 are not the same Taliban as before. They have a lot more economic interest. They're older. They now have stuff and they don't want to lose it. So there's all of that. And with regards to the refugee, I think that in much the same way that other regimes have permitted a continuous trickle, if not flow, of people out of their nations that could be trouble for them, that we should anticipate, Doctor, that there will be a continuous flow coming in. Yes, there was this initial tidal wave, but the flow will probably continue on a more gradual basis. And we have a common enemy with the Taliban in the ISIS group. It's just super complicated, and how this plays out, I don't know. I'm advising my clients that I still serve, the U.S. government clients that are contractors that are there, to just hold tight and be patient. This, as we've said, this is a very complex situation, and how it plays out, we don't really know, but it's not predetermined in any one direction.
Well, I want to thank all of you and Manny for being so concise. Thank you all for being on the show. I wish we had more time, but we don't. I would like to thank my audience for watching, and don't forget that you can see this show on YouTube. Have a good one, everybody. See you next time.